A man chooses. To the average person, those three words are most likely of little to no significance at face value. And yet to most gamers from the Zoomer generation, like myself, they're instantly recognizable. Today I'm going to be talking about a game that is heralded by many as one of the era-defining titles of the 7th console generation, as well as why it's still relevant 13 years after its initial release. And that game is, of course, BioShock.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture.
A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. Da 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 da. Even if you've never played, hell, even if you've never even seen footage of it, BioShock is a name that you've more likely heard than not if you're involved at all with gaming. And for good reason as well, because while it isn't the first of its kind, BioShock was the title that first introduced the genre of immersive sims to the masses, as well as one of the first games that really demonstrated how you could use the framework of a video game to tell an engrossing story. I won't be specifically talking about the caveats or the history of immersive sims, but if you're curious about the genre and its history, Charlatan Wonder has an amazing video on that subject, which I'll link down in the description. But without further ado, let's discuss what BioShock is. I should probably preface this part by saying that I'm using footage from both the best and worst way of playing BioShock. That being, of course, the original release on PC, but with a keyboard and mouse. If it is at all possible for you to do so, avoid the remasters at all costs. To this day, on the PC in particular, it still remains an absolute clusterfuck of bugs and glitches. And in all actuality, it looks far worse than the original as well, but we'll talk more about that specifically later. Like all immersive sims, BioShock allows you pretty much complete freedom in how you choose to undertake every challenge that's thrown at you throughout its runtime. You can use whatever weapons you want, whichever plasmids you desire, and you can explore the levels in pretty much any order that you see fit. For the most part anyways. There's also a hacking minigame you can play to take over cameras, turrets, cute little escort bots, as well as lower prices at vending machines, all of which help circumvent the amount of time you need to spend rummaging around looking for ammo. Though the game really does pin its hopes on you enjoying the hacking minigame, because you will find yourself doing it constantly. Just for the record, I actually sped this footage, which I feel compelled to mention is only from the 3rd level of the game, up to 650% speed, just so you would get a feel for how frequent the hacking can be at times, as well as how much of a time sink it truly is. And this isn't even everything I could hack in this one room. Nonetheless, there is an abundance of variety in how you can approach the game. And while I will concede that this fact means that there is truly no correct way to play, I will also make the counter-argument that there certainly is a most efficient way to play. So let's run through that really quickly. The first set of priorities are by far the two most tedious things to do, but they are obviously the most important. First, when you get the research camera in Fontaine Fisheries, research fucking everything. It nets you permanent buffs, as well as neat little tonics, which honestly, I didn't ever really use in any of my playthroughs. But most importantly, it gives you damage boosts to whatever enemy you're taking the photo of, which will be incredibly helpful once you get to late game where the enemies kind of get a little bit bullet spongy. The other annoyance is to hack every camera and turret in the more open spaces. There's a notable amount of backtracking in BioShock's playtime, and having the automated systems there to kill the enemies in the more heavily trafficked areas will save you a ton of ammo and time in needless encounters. The second set of priorities are plasmid, tonic, and weapon upgrades, and we'll start with the latter. I don't care what anyone else says, there are a total of 3 weapons that are actually useful in BioShock, and they are in order: the wrench, the pistol, and the chemical thrower. The wrench in BioShock is by far one of the most comically overpowered weapons in any of the video games I've played to date. Assuming that you keep up with your research, you can pretty much one-shot any enemy with a swift bash to the head throughout a majority of the game. The pistol, much like the wrench, is more or less a one-shot kill for most of the game, though in the later stages you will have to start using the anti-personal rounds to achieve this effect. Generally speaking, I personally find myself using the pistol whenever there's a larger group of enemies due to the whole killing at range benefit, and I use the wrench for my just general traversal of the City of Rapture. And lastly, the chemical thrower. I only use the chem thrower for one specific purpose: killing big daddies. It's probably considered cheesing, but with the electric gel and the upgraded consumption rate, you can literally just keep those big metal brutes stun-locked into the great hereafter, which will save you a small fortune in first aid kits and Eve hypos. There are actually only 2 plasmids that are truly important for upgrading, and those are Electroball, which stuns enemies and also adds a 400% damage boost to the next attack that hits them, which when paired with the wrench only adds to the absurd godlike power of your swing. And Insect Swarm, which also temporarily stuns enemies as well as slowly draining their health. It's not quite as useful in the early levels, but once you get closer to the end of the game, you start to run across splicers that are immune to Electroball, and this gives you enough time to just give them a quick bash in the face. As for tonics, this is more of a loose selection, but the best ones for the playstyle I've recommended so far are the Armored Shell, Damage Research, Electric Flesh, Wrench Jockey, Sports Boost, and Bloodlust. Other than those 6, I mean whatever tickles your pickle, man. Naturally, these are only suggestions, and you're free to do with them as you wish, but as much as I do adore this game, and as fun as all the different weapon and plasmids can be to mess around with, the combat was never really where BioShock's strengths lied, and it can get shockingly boring during longer gaming sessions. Also, if you play on PC, use a controller. There is no raw input for the mouse sensitivity, and you have to deal with forced acceleration when you're aiming, as well as a janky cursor when you're in the menus in the hacking minigame, which is a fucking nightmare, and led to me having to constantly swap between 600 and 2000 DPI throughout my playthrough. Seems like it would have been an easy fix for the remaster, but fuck me, right? Moving on. I'm going to have to give a brief little speedrun of the entire narrative of BioShock before I get into detail on my overall opinion of the title. Needless to say, spoilers will be included, but since I am such a benevolent human being, I will give ample warning before discussing the important parts, as well as go out of my way to leave a timestamp down in the little description box so you can skip past it if you so choose. You play as this guy, his name is Jack, don't know why they bothered to name him since no one fucking uses his name throughout the whole game, but moving on. You're on a plane, it crashes, you swim to a lighthouse, get in a conveniently docked sub, and find yourself listening to some Russian guy named Andrew Ryan. Remember that name, this guy is important, talking about sweat or some shit as you enter the City of Rapture. From there, you're contacted via radio by a man named Atlas who offers to help guide you to safety if you help him and his family escape the city. I'm not sure about you, but personally this set off red flags for me because what kind of Irishman in the 1950s actually gave a shit about their family? Stereotypes exist for a reason after all. Nonetheless, he's also important and acts as your guide throughout most of the game. Now, on the way to meet up with your lovely little leprechaun friend and his family, you get the pleasure of meeting a very friendly cosmetic surgeon who just wants to give everybody free facelifts because we all deserve to be as beautiful on the outside as we feel on the inside. And then he dies. You also meet some pervert who tells you he'll help you out, but only after you partake in his role-playing fantasies by playing paparazzi and taking some creepy pictures of unsuspecting unsuspecting denizens of Rapture. He also dies. After all that, though, you finally get to the bathysphere dock where Atlas and his family have been waiting on your arrival. And now that I think about it, why the hell did I have to go through this mess to meet Atlas and his family? I took a bathysphere to get here, for Christ's sakes. Couldn't I have just taken one back to the and they're dead? Well, that's shitty. At this point, Atlas tells you that we're going to help him in his mission to avenge his family or whatever by killing Andrew Ryan. Don't really see the connection or how it's our job, but since he asked ever so nicely, I suppose we can humor him. On your brand new journey, you'll meet some crazy tree hugger who wants you to help save her forest, and then she dies. I'm starting to notice a little bit of a theme here, I'm not sure about you. You also meet an art boy who wants you to kill his missing students. I guess they didn't show up to his Zoom class or something. He dies too. Wait, no he doesn't. This guy is clearly insane. Why aren't you killing him? Fuck it, whatever. Moving on. Here's the spoilery bit, so obviously link down in the description if you'd care to skip it. But we're getting back to the story in 3, 2, and 1? You've finally done it. After spending entirely too long backtracking all over Hephaestus to build an EMP bomb, you finally disabled all of the security measures, keeping Andrew Ryan's office closed off from you. This is the defining moment of BioShock's story, where every suspicion you had in the playthrough until now is confirmed. You're not the hero, you're just a puppet dancing to the tune that Atlas has been playing for you this entire game. A man chooses, a slave obeys. These are the final 6 words that Andrew Ryan leaves you with before ordering you to kill him. And through this action, despite all of the abysmal things he's done in his time as the founder of Rapture, one can't argue that he becomes, even if briefly, a good guy. After this, Atlas reveals himself to be Frank Fontaine, a character whose name you've heard a couple of times throughout the game, but scarcely heard. And spoilers over. Let's get on with the closer to this story. With the absence of both Andrew Ryan and Atlas, the game's primary driving forces, everything just kind of feels hollow and pointless for the rest of the playthrough. I mean, yes, you do get to see our favorite boy Sander Cohen again and finally put him out of his misery, and you do cure yourself and take revenge on Frankie Boy, but it's never as satisfying as you would imagine. I feel like a lot of people look back at BioShock with this fond memory of a title that had this amazing plot, but in all actuality, the plot itself was rather average and bland, even by the standards we had back then. In that sense, I would actually consider it comparable to things like the Star Wars franchise or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And much like those titles, the true magic of BioShock's story lies not so much in the narrative itself, but rather entirely in how it is executed. And now we get to talk about the main attraction of the entire BioShock experience. A city I adore. A city as equally breathtaking as it is foreboding. A city known as Rapture. At this point, I think I've played BioShock somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 times, and every time I revisit this underwater dystopia, I remain as entranced as I was during my first visit. It's honestly such a beautiful locale, with its flickering neon lights, the bold colors and geometric designs indicative of its Art Deco inspirations, the cold teal glow of the ocean flooding in through the windows, invoking an equally mixed sense of both isolation and wonder. BioShock is a stunning example of why art direction is so crucial to creating a visual marvel. Even though it's running on a modified version of what is by today's standards an ancient engine known as Unreal 2, it still looks better than a majority of the games that I've played recently. I mean, let's face it, a metric fuckton of grass and trees is just a metric fuckton of grass and trees. If you don't have any meaningful vision in mind, when you're trying to put the assets together, your game will look like shit, no matter how detailed the textures are, or how realistically they blow around in your computerized wind. It takes work to make game visuals work. You know? Because of the tremendous effort that this kind of stuff takes, I wanted to give a quick shout out / thank you. All the names on the screen currently are the names of those who designed and brought this world to life. All of you did a phenomenal job. But as beautiful as Rapture is, it is also incredibly unnerving. So much so that despite how many times I've run through the game, during my most recent playthrough to get the footage for this video, I never actually felt 100% comfortable exploring the city ruins. And it's not even like BioShock has all that many horror elements to it. Sure, there's an odd jump scare here and there, but at this point I have those moments pretty much memorized. It's more that the decay of Rapture is just so perfectly conveyed in every aspect of its presentation. Obviously, the visuals play a huge part in this, but I'd be remiss if I did not talk about the impeccable sound design. Everywhere you go in the city, you're constantly shadowed by the creaking of metal under the weight of an entire ocean, the sounds of water leaking in through its cracked glass and metal framing, the security cameras slowly panning, splicers in the distance murmuring to themselves, little sisters singing in their creepy distorted voice and the big daddies groan. There's also the way that enemies will randomly spawn in rooms you haven't been in for some time, or they'll wander into the room you're currently in, causing you to never be entirely certain how long you can avoid a confrontation. Now that I'm actually talking about the game like this, there is one thing that terrifies me: the fucking plaster splicers. Holy hell, I hate these things with a burning passion, and they're the one thing that still jump scares me without fail every time I play this game. They are these virtually noiseless bastards that are programmed to spawn strictly outside of your FOV, and sometimes they'll even spawn in other rooms and just wait at the door for you to exit. I have no idea why I choose to deal with them every playthrough, since their activation is completely optional. I'm just greedy and want that weapon upgrade, I guess. Seriously though, it's not a horror game. It's just creepy as hell. While I haven't strayed from spoiling the game or talking about how the gameplay develops throughout the video so far, I have tried to avoid talking about the specific moments that encapsulate the best and worst parts of the BioShock experience. With that in mind, it makes the most sense to me if I start out by talking about the absolute best part of the game, that being Fort Frolic. Fort Frolic is the peak, the pinnacle, the apex, whatever, of BioShock, and the purest expression of everything amazing that this game has to offer. I would actually go so far as to argue that Fort Frolic is probably one of the single best standalone levels in gaming, period. This video would get far too long if I took the time to break down everything I adore in this level. And honestly, Game Maker's Toolkit already made a video about it that's far more concise than anything I could ever make. So if you're curious, I'll leave a link down in the description for that as well. Though I will mention that this is the level that contains the previously mentioned plaster splicers, which I love them so much. And while I did say the story itself was rather bland early in the video, even I can't deny how cleverly it was implemented. Using the framework of an immersive sim to build to a climax that reveals your utter lack of choice is such a clever twist. And without that moment, I'm not entirely sure this game would be as relevant as it still remains today. And lastly, for the best bits, dear God, the soundtrack and score. I don't think there could be a selection of music for BioShock more perfect than what we got. It's honestly such a shame that I couldn't use some of the licensed music from the game because of YouTube's whole copyright shtick, but if you decide to play BioShock someday, take the time and just listen to some of the music. On to the bad parts. To start out, there's just no way around how abysmal the PC ports are. I mentioned it earlier, but the lack of care that went into the keyboard and mouse controls is just irritating as all hell. And look, I usually play PC shooters on an insanely high sensitivity, but even I struggled to control the mouse accurately sometimes, lowering my sensitivity down to 600 DPI and on the lowest in-game sensitivity that BioShock has to offer. Another thing I mentioned earlier is the remaster looking worse than the original, so let me explain what I meant by that. Sure, in the remaster the FOV is better, and some of the textures are better too, but the one thing that makes BioShock and Rapture such a magical place to explore is its ambience, and the remaster absolutely decimated the quality of lighting and reflections, which is honestly one of the most immersive things about the visual experience of the game. There is also the matter of the ending. I won't spoil the big plot twist again, again because honestly I'm too lazy to add a second timestamp down in the description, but I truly meant it when I said everything past that point just feels hollow. I really didn't care in the slightest about Fontaine, Tannenbaum, or Jack enough to get any enjoyment out of the conclusion, and I genuinely believe that the plot twist should have been the actual ending to the game, and the setup to a full-on sequel with adequate time to properly flesh out the story of Jack getting his retribution and saving or destroying the city. So where does this leave us? There was a time when I would have said BioShock is a must-play title, no matter how much you like video games. But with how far gaming has come as a whole in the past 13 years, I think it's settled more into the role of a classic, to be played by those looking to go back and appreciate a piece of gaming history. 13 years is a long time after all, and you can certainly feel it when you're playing the game today. But nonetheless, I still think the pilgrimage to Rapture is a wonderful experience for those looking to undertake it.